There we go.
There we go.
All right, cool. I think the recording is starting. Well, thanks a lot for doing this, Ty. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to be with you. I'm actually traveling today, so we're doing our Zoom podcast from New York City. So happy to be here with you.
What are you doing in New York City?
I was here for the Broadway League meeting yesterday and seeing a bunch of shows, and I'm sure we'll get into talking just about all the things that we do as an organization, which includes investing in Broadway shows sometimes, but mostly here for seeing shows and Tony voting and all that good stuff.
Yeah, awesome. I am really excited to talk more about what you're doing with Dayton Live, and I think that's last time I checked, you run like 7 incredible performing arts arenas. Is 7 the right number?
I mean, it's really like 5 that we use full time, but we have everything from all these different rehearsal studios to a parking garage and the Starbucks and a lot of other things. So 5 primary performing venues, but then tons and tons of support space and lots of other things, but about 700,000 square feet of space. So, we're pretty good size for a performing arts organization.
Awesome. Okay, so how did you? Why don't we start from day one? What did you want to be in the live music industry? And I don't think you started off in the performing arts space. I know. I think you were you doing concerts in college, or how did you get into all this?
Yeah, no, I totally fell into it. I definitely wasn't on a path where I thought this was going to be my career. I grew up in the San Francisco area, just east of San Francisco, East Bay, and I ended up going to college at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. And I was on track to probably be a lawyer. That's what I thought I'd do. I was in political science and getting ready for that path. I think I was always more logical, but I grew up with the arts. I grew up singing and did performances and sang in high school and did all that stuff, was in multiple choirs all the way through. But, unlike some of my friends, it was never a career goal for me. Like that wasn't what I was going to do. And I wasn't good enough either. And I knew that. I just enjoyed it and it was fun, but I always loved it. And so actually I ended up.
I did not know you sung.
Oh yeah. I sing.
Do you still sing at all?
No, I mean, no, every once in a while I'll, join in on something, but
in the shower, maybe.
Yeah, no, in the shower for sure. Right. So with my kids in the car, but,
I would love to witness that at some point.
No, but I mean, I love
the singing part. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh God.
It was just one of those fun things, like that I really enjoyed. And I found I found my tribe, like I found my people. But it never, I did have some friends that went to college. I thought about being a voice major for like 5 minutes, but ultimately knew that wasn't really my place. So, people have always told me I was very sort of rational, logical thinker. And, when you're good at something, people like push you in a certain way. That's just how it goes. And in my sort of growing up, working in like the entertainment industry was never like, that wasn't something that I knew people that did, like that just wasn't something I was around or had influence with anyone. But so anyway, long story short, I ended up knowing some people working on a concerts committee at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, where I went to school. And it was to put on a big festival, and people started bailing because life got busy, and that's just not how I am. So, I was probably too young and too naive to know I shouldn't just like call up artists and try and book them. So I did, I started calling artists, and I think like the first thing I ever did, I booked like Everclear. This is, in the 90s, like mid 90s. And so I think that was 97, Everclear and Ben Harper and a bunch of people that were really like hot at the time, and ended up doing the Dave Matthews acoustic tour. And I really liked it. I mean, to me, I love the business side. I love people having this great experience. And I thought it was really fun to do, while I was going to college. And I actually met some local promoters in Utah, and they said, hey, you seem to understand this, do you want a job? And so I started working with them. And
anybody that's still around for those promoters?
No, nobody that's still in the business really. we did a couple like co-promotes with people that are still around, and a couple
Steiny, right? At some point?
No, I never co-promoted with Steiny. I just knew he was doing some of the same stuff in Colorado when we were doing Utah. And I met him early on, but I don't think we ever actually co-promoted. I mean, I did some stuff with like Bill Graham Presents out of San Francisco at the time. And we had a little company called Encore Entertainment, had a 299 cap room that I helped promote with a guy named Sean Barnett, guy who everybody called Ole. Nobody even knew his real name, but Ole was, sort of a Salt Lake City promoter. And we eventually started promoting a bigger 1,000 cap room in Park City, Utah called Harrio's. And it was just fun. I mean, for me at the time, it was simply like, hey, you're doing this, you're about to graduate from college, and then you'll go to law school or whatever I was going to do. And I think I was really on that path. And I still don't really know the moment where I'm like, hey, this is what I should do for a living. Like, you go back and think about it. But what actually happened with me was the university actually offered me a job to help run their presenter's office that did all these things. And so that was my first like actual job, when I graduated. And I thought, oh, I'll do this for a year or two, and then I'll like, finish the LSAT and go to law school. That really was my thought of like, this is fun for the moment. And then and I did have fun. And, we booked a lot of shows. I booked some arena stuff, and, we partnered with some major promoters on like U2 wanted to come in and use the university stadium for their tour at the time. I mean, stuff like that we were involved with, which was really cool. And so I saw this bigger sort of gamut of like club shows to, bigger like radio shows in arenas, up the stadiums. And, it sort of opened my eyes, not working for a major promoter or anything like that. And then, what happened to me was just really a circumstance of I was in Salt Lake at the time, and the 2002 Winter Olympics were coming. And so in like late 99, they ramped up a huge organization to staff all the Olympic venues. And I knew some people working there, and they said, you've done these shows and you've been involved in a lot of things. You would be great to come and work for us. And so I actually ended up getting a job with the Olympics and worked there for, I think my contract for like 2.5 years, because I did the Olympics and Paralympics, and ended up running event services for the men's hockey venue. So I like took this sidestep to go work in sports, which was really cool, because once again, I saw how different events happen, like little club events, bigger club, arena, stadium, and then working on a world, event like the Olympics totally sort of changed my sense of what events could be, I guess, because at the end of the day, when people ask me what I do, I put on shows, I put on events. I mean, that's really sort of my DNA and what I enjoy. But it was amazing to work with all these people that had done multiple Olympics and World Cups and worked on some of the biggest events in the world, and just the professionalism they brought to it, and the planning, and the marketing skill and the ticketing skill. And so, at a pretty young age in my, maybe, let's see, when the Olympics actually happened, I was 27, and I'd already been there for almost 3 years. But that was really fulfilling. And I actually had a chance to keep working for the Olympics and moved to Europe, but I chose not to. I was actually getting married at the time. And my wife is actually a professional ballerina. And so that really sort of drew me into that arts world, and I got to know it more and more. And I did some of that at the university, but it just opened my eyes to the overall event space. So that was really sort of how I started in the business, which is not, I don't know, everybody has their own path for how they get into this, right? Like, it seems like we have more and more young people now that this is what they want to do, and they go through, either an arts management program or a sports management program or something similar to end up where they are. But in the mid 90s, I could probably count on one hand how many programs had something like that at universities. So, it was all life experience.
So you were getting married, you turned down the opportunity to go to work in the Olympics in Europe, and through, your wife's experience as a ballerina, you you were introduced to the performing arts space. But what was your first gig after turning down the Olympics?
I was really lucky in that I had a job lined up And
How old were you at this time too?
so let's see, in '02, I would have been 26, I think. When the Olympics ended, I was 26. And so, when those major world events end, they're just done. It's like turn in all your crap and, we're done. And you take this massive organization of like thousands of employees and volunteers and you break it all down in like 3 weeks. And I still remember how weird that was to look at something that took us years to build up. And then like truly in a matter of weeks, it's just done. And most of my colleagues were international. Like a lot of them were Aussies and Kiwis who'd worked in Sydney, the Sydney Games. We had people from Europe and all over the world. There actually wasn't that many people that were local. And so it's crazy because everyone came together and then they just sort of split apart in this moment. And it's crazy because I have colleagues who are still in that business. In fact, several of them are in Doha right now doing the World Cup. I mean, like they've just stayed on this path where they have worked games after games and, they do things like Dalai Lama visits and just these major world events and just have that lifestyle. And it's really cool if that's, sort of where you want to go. For me, I was able to line up a job actually staying in Utah at that point. And I got a job as booking manager of a brand new resort called Thanksgiving Point. And we had like 1,000-seat theater. We had a 4,000 or 5,000 seat amphitheater and a fairgrounds and sort of booked tons of shows. And so I got
what kind of shows?
I'm sorry, what was that?
What kind of shows?
So, I mean, we booked everything from like, I remember working with like Brian Regan, the comedian, when he was like super young and starting out in my smaller theater, and we do some music and country in there, local bands. And then in the amphitheater, I had a deal with Concerts West where we do co-promoted shows together. And then we also booked like a county fair in this huge fairgrounds. So I got a taste of a whole bunch of other things. At the time I worked with some talent buyers and then other things I'd book myself. So it was a real mix. And then like at Christmas, we did like drive-through Christmas lights. So I helped work on the marketing for that. I mean, it was just really all over the place because this was a massive resort with like hundreds of acres, a golf course, tons of event space, restaurants, a museum, movie theaters. And now I look back, and this is 20 years ago, and that resort is completely built out. Whereas when I worked there, it was just hundreds of acres of land. And now it's houses and office buildings. And it makes me realize I'm starting to get old. But, it was a good experience in that I got to work on a lot of diverse shows. And it was the first time I worked on Ticketmaster extensively. So I started to get real ticketing experience and learn Ticketmaster. But I'll be honest, like I was young and mostly winging it, and a lot of stuff I'm like, oh yeah, sure, I can do that. And I was totally figuring it out as I went. But luckily I worked for some
So
really
it goes
people there. Yeah, right. So, fake it till you make it. I worked for some really good people there that are still, mentors of mine. A lady named Katie Riney, who had actually come from the Utah Jazz organization to head up event services there, and who I worked for, and a guy named Brandon Spivak, who was our VP of marketing, who, has been in the business. And so it was a really good group. And unfortunately, that job only lasted about 1 year. The resort itself was still new, and they'd really probably got overextended financially and had to do some pretty big layoffs. And so, I'd been married for, I think, like 3 months at that point, and came into work one day and found out our whole division was laid off. They just had to make cuts. And, so that's interesting as like a younger person, and you're not really sure if that, it never really cemented with me, like, this is your path for your career going forward. And so that would have been in like spring of '03. And I was sort of, so almost 20 years ago. That's crazy. So I was sort of at this place where I had, I didn't really know, what my path going forward looked like. And I probably spent about a year sort of bouncing around. Like I helped some guys open a nightclub in Utah and get a liquor license in Utah, which is like the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, if I'm being honest. Like the logistical government hurdles. I mean, It's a lot easier now, but that was crazy, especially, I mean, we're talking Utah. So, and open a nightclub that, I don't know, I think it only lasted about 6 months, but I just got them to opening. And I, I went back and did some middle agent things for the university and bought some shows. Like I remember.
Why'd the club only last 6 months?
Oh, let's talk. Let's just say they are not in the business anymore. And,
oh no.
Yeah, there was a lot of people went to rehab, I think, more than anything. It was one of those, like, a lot young people with just enough money to make it through and a good plan, but nobody could follow through with the plan. So that was a learning lesson for me too. Get paid up front, everyone. Just get paid up front. That's
no boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess, like, for me, I took a lot of lessons from those things that helped me out later on. So I'll chalk it up to that. And then, I sort of survived by doing some middle agent stuff. I remember buying like a They Might Be Giant show for the university, like, back then, and some things like that. And sort of like, I was really figuring out, okay, like, where's my career taking me? And, it's funny because the events industry, the music industry, it's so small. A good friend of mine, we actually ran venues together at the Olympics, a guy named Scott Lasker. Hey, Scott, he's still in the business and has worked in like the NFL and different arenas and things. He connected me in like spring. So I bounced around for about a year. So in spring of 2004, gosh, man, I should have like written down my history better, because I'm like, was it really that year? But I think spring of 2004, he connected me to a guy named Quinn Mackin, at the Arrowhead Pond in Anaheim, California. So big hockey arena, major concert venue in Anaheim. And I got on the phone with Quinn. He said, hey, I'm looking for an event services manager, and we need somebody to come in and run a bunch of areas here at the arena, and somebody that understands concerts, but also hockey, since we're an NHL, owned arena. And we're going through this transition where Disney owns the team and they're about to sell the team to somebody. And honestly, without even thinking, without even visiting, my wife and I decided, hey, let's just go have this adventure. And I agreed to move there and be their event services manager. So that spring, summer, we moved down to Anaheim. And it was actually great for me. I got to, be back in the thick of it day to day and running, all the team operations. And we went through an ownership change right after I got there, where this family, the Samuelis, bought the team and they had the arena too. So it was all one organization, and, went through a really big reorganization right when I got there. So just like really positive things and a huge renewed energy. And my wife actually went and worked for Disney while we were there. And like, she sort of transitioned away from doing ballet and worked for Disney and was in all their shows and like absolutely loved it, had the time of her life. So it was a really cool thing for me. And I met some people who probably don't even know like what an impact they had on me. Man, this is making me really like go through things. But we had our CEO was a guy named Tim Ryan, who is still with the organization. But Tim was, whether he knows it or not, was a huge mentor for me. The way that he ran the staff, the way he treated people, the fact he would take time to teach. He would let me sit in on settlements with, I remember sitting in on one with like Irving Azoff, like these huge figures in the business.
How was that?
I mean, I think what I learned more than anything is like relationships matter and your word matters. And so, Tim was one of these people that if he said something was going to happen, people just knew it would happen. And, he never did it by like yelling or being that guy. It was really by leading the team and being there and showing up. And it just really had an effect on me on the way I try to lead. I'm not going to say I always achieved that, but the way I tried to lead an organization. And just that it's all about relationships and it's all about trust. And if people trust you, that you're going to do the right thing, that you're going to keep your word and do what you say and usually over deliver, that your team wants to do that as well. So working with Tim and then Quinn Mackin, I mean, like I look back at the people there, Great people, Joanne Armstrong, who's now out, opening the new Acrisure Arena out in Palm Springs or Palm Desert. You start to like meet people in the business, and my job was events there. It wasn't booking shows or anything else. And I just remembered how much I missed that part of it. Like, it was great to lead, ticketing, security, event services, all those things. I probably had, I don't know, 400 or 500 part-time employees and some full-time too. But I was like, I missed that part of it. Like, I missed being around like the deal making and the show. And it was also just this transitional thing where I'm like, I think this is my career at this point, but I was late 20s by this time and sort of figuring that out. And
the bar truck had left the station at that point, the bar exam.
Yeah, no, it had. I mean, like I was a bit past that, and it was the start of a running joke that's still like a joke to this day, which was in my family, was sort of like, when Ty gets a real job. You know what I mean? Like, it was always sort of like, is this my career path? But the one thing that's blessed me in my professional career is like, when people are like, hey, would you be interested in doing this? If I am, I say yes. Like, I've not been timid that way. And really the thing that changed for me, I mean, I could have seen myself working there for a long time, but I realized a couple things. I loved working in theaters. And although I really loved sports, I didn't have the need to work in sports the way some people that I knew did. You know what I mean? Like, their life was around that. And I love, basketball, football. I love live hockey. Watching live hockey is actually awesome. But I didn't need to work in that. And I really did love, music and theater and the arts. And even though I got to work on, I don't know, 100 major like arena shows in the couple years I was there. I mean, I probably still have all my lanyards, I mean, I think we did like 11 nights with the Eagles right when they came back touring, in Southern California, and worked on a ton of shows. And that part was really cool, but I liked being part of like the deal making. And that was, something I wasn't going to do there. And so after a couple years in Southern California, we made, for some family reasons, we decided to move back to Northern California, where I was from. And I was lucky enough to get a job, from day one there, and went back into a small performing arts center in Walnut Creek, California, just east of San Francisco. So I think that really started me on the path that I'm on now, which is...
What was that called, and what was the size of it, and what kind of stuff did it do?
Yeah, so that was the Lesher Center for the Arts in Walnut Creek, which is like 3 smaller theaters. There's like an 800-seat theater, a 300-seat, and then a black box. And it's city owned by the city of Walnut Creek. And so I went up there, and I think my title was like audience services director. So I was in charge of ticketing and all the staffing, catering events, things like that. We basically divided up. There was 2 directors in the building. Like, one took all the front of house and one took all the back of house. And then we had a general manager. So it was sort of a step up for me in terms of responsibility as well, where I was, overseeing like several hundred performances a year. We also had a 4th theater we ran that was like 5 miles away, remotely. And so it was also the first time, I mean, like, obviously Prism, I have some history with Prism, Matt. It was the first time I started thinking about like remote management, and like I was running like all these legacy ticket systems. My first ticket system there was like ArtSoft, and it was so bad. And they were like at the tail end of even like servicing it. And so I remember transitioning maybe in 07 onto this brand new thing called tickets.com, like .com, like it was this big deal. We were going like internet-based ticketing. And I've always had this interest, because I've had these different jobs in technology and moving through different ticket systems and platforms, and what connects us, to technology and people. And honestly, I mean, I was in San Francisco area, so all those things were happening. Like, the tech bubble had happened a few years earlier. And, all my friends that worked at all these high flying companies, like the companies just disappeared. And so I started thinking about that, especially because we were, running a remote location on the same ticketing stuff. And I remember we had like some direct T1 line, whatever that meant at the time, to like try and get good internet. I mean, just crazy stuff that we take for granted now because we hook it all up with a hotspot and go. But it sort of also started my interest in like how we can use technology to be effective, because I was building the shows myself for all of our ticketing platforms. And I remember sitting there and just going, this is so inefficient. And I'm spending, hundreds of hours a year building shows and building pricing, and just thinking, man, if this could just get better, this would be so much easier. So that was good, but it was a good time for me, family wise, because I was back around all my family. They all lived in the Bay Area at that time, East Bay of San Francisco. And my dad had really pushed. He's like, you got, you've been married for a few years now. We'd love to have you home. And so it was, there was a lot of family reasons and stuff too. And, we were a pretty young married couple with no kids yet. And so it was like, yeah, this seemed like a good idea for a while. But truth is, being back in that area that I took for granted growing up and realizing how expensive it is to live there, we were like, I don't know if I can do this job and us live in the San Francisco area either.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah. Do you get that in Austin?
Yeah. It's not as bad as San Francisco. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So you were, so when did you, this is cool because you're the executive director right now at Dayton Live. Is that the title, or CEO or
President CEO?
President CEO. Okay. Got it. So what was your first, this is cool because I've always thought of you as like running the show. So you obviously weren't at this venue outside of San Francisco. What was the first time that you took over the operation of, was it your next job where you were actually running the show, or?
Yeah, it was my next job. So we actually only ended up being in Northern California for like 2 years basically. And in fact, my boss there was a guy named Scott Dennison, who's now retired. And Scott even told me after I'd been there like a year, he's like, you need to go run something, like you're ready to go run something. And he was one of the first people that put it in my mind that I was ready to run something.
And maybe that means that he wants to get you out of your hair.
Yeah, right.
Out of his hair.
I mean, but like just in terms of the industry, I was maybe 30 or 31. Like I was still, in an industry where a lot of the leadership tends to stay in these positions for a really long time. I was still like a pretty young person, and even though like maybe rationally I thought, oh, I can do this, like that's a big step when it's all of a sudden like, hey, you're in charge, like go do this. And I really think the background I had, like the different places I worked, the fact that I understood deal structures and I understood how important it was to be, really transparent and a person of your word, like all of it came together. And I actually accepted a job. I had a choice. I could have gone back to the Olympics. In fact, Vancouver really wanted me to come there and run a bunch of venues. Which would have been super exciting, to be back in the Olympics. And a lot of my friends were going back to Vancouver. And at the same time, we found out that we were pregnant with our son. And so Canada got really complicated for things like healthcare and all that. And so I was offered a job actually in Colorado. So my first job as general manager, executive director, was at the Lincoln Center in Fort Collins, Colorado. Which really holds a special place in my heart. So we moved there in late 2008. And yeah, that was my first job. And it was a really cool job because I was hired to come in and help the organization to figure out how to do a big capital project on this very old existing building. And so, we actually, I was there for 4.5 years. We actually tore down most of the building and rebuilt it on the same site. We closed down for like a year and rebuilt in a year. And I think like it was the perfect timing. It was the subprime crisis. So there was no construction in the country. Like contractors were lining up to do work for super cheap just to keep working. It's like the exact opposite of right now where everything's so expensive. And so we planned it out for like almost 2 years. Did that for a year, reopened, and I had a couple seasons there. and then was actually recruited to go open a new building down in Midland, Texas. So Lincoln Center was my first gig. It was my first gig booking like full week Broadway. We were independent. Started working with a lot of promoters who I still know really well now. People like, David Weingarten, who does all the stuff in Colorado, Boulder, Jason Zink, Steinberg, a lot of these people I started doing shows with. I had series with a bunch of different people, and we did that was a small venue, honestly. It's about 1,200 seats, but it was the largest venue in that area of Northern Colorado. We just did tons of shows. We did, everything from, really more performing arts stuff to just a lot of music, a lot of jam band stuff like that. Cause that's just, I don't know. Fort Collins has a really cool personality. It's like breweries and pretty chill. So.
Oh yeah. Well, before we jump down to Texas, in running your first operation, what did you do well and what did you fail at and bring to your next venue?
Yeah, no. It's funny, the fail part. I guess I've never been afraid to like try new things. So I failed a lot. I mean, like that's the first thing I tell people is if you hire me, we're going to fail a lot together sometimes, because when you try a lot of new things, like failure isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as you can learn from it and move forward. Part of me realizes as much as I thought, and we were a publicly owned building, so we were owned by the city of Fort Collins. So there was a ton of scrutiny on everything we did because it was all very publicly transparent. And I still remember, in going through the process to do a lot of the tear down and build up the new building, the craziest thing happened, which was we had a contractor and they accidentally cut the roots of some big trees on the property, and the trees weren't going to survive. And it was like the end of the world for certain people there that we'd killed trees, even though you're talking about a place that, there's a lot of trees around. It's in Colorado. But these were, older trees on a property of a school that had been there for like 100 years. And I think I probably didn't realize the impact that was going to have on people or how upset they were going to be. And so I got a lot of criticism that I probably deserved, in all honesty, because I just sort of was like, too bad they're trees. Like, that sucks. We messed up. But I didn't realize how passionate people can be about things. So I think underestimating people's passion when they really mean it and it comes from an authentic place was like a huge failure I had. But it was also something I learned not to do again. And then, for me, I remember we went through an RFP for ticketing, and, I went with probably a lesser known company at the time. And a lot of people were really critical of that. And I was, I almost relented and was like, okay, we better go with, one of the big ones. But this is at a time like late, 2000s, where there was all this disruption, but, it wasn't like the surge of ticketing we saw, 5 or 6 years later. And I still remember like being I'm rarely, like on the fence, I'm rarely like wobble in these things. And I just kept going back and forth. And I finally went with my gut instinct to work with a company that actually ended up being a really good fit for what the venue needed. And they're probably still, I think they're still with them today. But what I learned was, do all the research, get all the input, talk to as many people as you can, but like trust your gut when you're the leader having to make the decision. And,
yeah, I've heard that in leadership, that like one thing that separates leadership from anything else is just the ability to make a decision. Like I've heard people say things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. I have an agent who's a good friend. And we were together just a couple weeks ago, and she was trying to get me to do something. I just said no. Like, I'm rarely somebody that's like, oh, maybe we can come back and revisit. I'm like, no. And she's like, no is actually the second best answer. Maybe is the worst answer, because it just leaves everybody in doubt. And I think decisiveness, as long as you've done the work to be sure of your decision, I think leaders who won't make a decision are way worse for their team than leaders that sometimes make the wrong decision, So, that was something that I think I've seen a lot. And, whenever you read about the best traits of leaders at a high level, I think one that comes up is just the ability to make decisions. that's the most stressful part of the job. And, if you're not making a decision, you're just sort of going through the motions each day. I also don't know where organizations go if nobody's making a decision. So, but it is something that I think is really important.
And then just fast forwarding through it, it's Texas, and then to Dayton, or was there a stop in between then?
Texas, Indiana, Butler University in Indiana, and then Dayton. So,
oh boy,
I get around a bit.
What and how much time did you spend in Texas, and how much time did you spend in Indiana?
So I spent 2.5 years in Texas, and really I went in with that thought process from day one. Midland, Texas. So this was the Wagner Noel Performing Arts Center, which was brand new, and had just hired SMG as a management company. So I worked for Bob Papke and Jim McHugh and the whole team at SMG when there was an SMG. And then after I'd been there for a couple months, Bob Papke asked me to get involved with the booking process for 10 other buildings in SMG. So I got to work with buildings in, Denver and Long Beach, like all the way up to Alaska.
Oh my!
On anything that SMG sort of had a financial interest in. So I got to see more of the company and meet more people and more promoters from around the country. And, it seems so long ago, but I guess it really was only like 10 years ago. But, just a lot of good people that now are, blowing it up. That's where I met people like Jeff Nickler and John Bolton and Joe Giordano, and people that, are sort of all over the place now in terms of what they do. And there is no more SMG, and people are sort of, there's ASM Global and a bunch of people at Oakview. And, it's cool to see where people have gone. And, Texas was a great experience for me. I went into a building that had no expectation. It was the first theater in Midland, Odessa. And if you don't know Midland, Odessa, that is the actual Friday Night Lights. So Odessa, Texas is where the book was written and where the whole thing was based. And it's true story. You have high school stadiums that look like, college stadiums, and football's a big deal. And we were their first real theater, beautiful. Wow. 1,800 seat theater that won all the awards when it was built. I mean, it's still like such an impressive space, but it's in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's between cities, and it's right by the airport, and you're driving along and there's nothing but, scrub desert. Oh, yeah. And all of a sudden there's just this amazing building that comes out of the ground. And the thing is, when I went to Midland, I mean, I knew it wasn't going to be long-term for me, just sort of, we had a young son at the time and, family and all that. But I also just thought it was such an opportunity to put together a staff and make it all work. And I give Bob a ton of credit because he worked in Philadelphia and I was in Texas, and, he kept in touch and gave me great, input, but he just let me do my thing and run my own company. So I think that was the first time that I really felt like I was running an organization day to day. And, we took that little tiny building, 1,800 seats, and put it in the top 50 worldwide for Polestar. I think the last full year I was there, we did something like 140 national touring show nights without Broadway, on a 365-day calendar. And that didn't include any of the local symphony or productions or university things we did. So it was pretty crazy. And we had a staff of like 7 full time at that point. I mean, it was pretty nuts. We were doing, I think close to 10 million in ticket sales in this one little building. And every time I turned around, I'm like, there's no way we're actually, this high up. But Wagner Noel continues to be a huge success story. And the original projections, when I go back and look, were that they do $1 million a year in ticket sales. So our third year, we were doing like, I think almost a 10x. It was pretty crazy.
What do you accredit the success of 10xing your goal?
I mean, so some of it was luck. So the first thing was, it's the perfect location. Like in terms of routing, if you know Texas at all, it's 5 hours from Austin to Midland. It's 5 hours from Dallas. It's 5 hours from El Paso. So if you're like, hey, we need to stop somewhere. I mean, that was what we took advantage. Like I had a great marketing director. I got super lucky. She was the CBS anchor in town, and we actually hired her off the CBS desk. Like, she was hired right as I was, maybe a little bit before. And so she knew everybody. I mean, she'd been the anchor there for a while, and everybody knew her. And she's now the general manager, Stephanie Rivas. Shout out to Stephanie. She's the best. And she's such an advocate for that community that she would convince people, like, if I couldn't close a show, she would get on, I remember her getting on calls and being like, everybody here is going to come to this show. We're going to sell it out. And so we had the fact that we were the perfect stopover on routing. We had the fact that we were in a huge oil boom at the time. And believe it or not, Midland, Texas had the highest average salary of any city in the United States, including New York City. So people were making $80,000 or $90,000 a year on average.
Oil.
No, oil. It's oil.
Oh, yeah, oil. I hear there's like lots of Lamborghinis like just cruising around the desert out there.
Yeah, I think at one point our board had like 5 billionaires on it. Like,
oh my God.
Or something crazy like that. I don't know. But I mean,
that's the middle of Texas for you.
Yeah. And the other thing was, I mean, like, I love the people in Texas, especially West Texas. They were so proud of that facility, and they supported us, and they were willing to pay very high ticket prices. I mean, we did people like Santana in that building, 1,800 seats, and sold out in 3 minutes or something like that. We were having these huge grosses. And pretty much every promoter wanted to work there because it was the perfect route and it was a new market. I mean, people were like, this market just sort of appeared out of nowhere. And so every act was new to the market, so we were doing stuff. I remember we did America, the band at one time. I think we grossed like 90 grand. People were like, what is going on in this market? And so it was really fun because people just wanted to go to stuff. And what you have to realize about Midland, Odessa, you have to drive 5 hours to go see a show otherwise. So the fact that people didn't have to do that, they were willing to pay high prices if we could get artists there. And we got a lot of artists to come play. We also started a performing arts series and did a lot of dance and things. And we started doing Broadway in that building. And, a lot of people after the first season are like, I didn't really like that. And I'm like, well, you tried it, I mean, you don't have to like everything. But the people, yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say the people that did like it were our biggest fans and advocates,
Yeah, what I'm getting from that is just understand your market, know your strengths and weaknesses, and obviously play to your strengths.
Yeah, 100%. And also, there's people, and especially when I put on like my performing arts hat, because I do so much of that work, especially the last 10 years or so, but meet people where they are is what I think the important thing is. Before they'd open the building, the university that owns the building, who hired SMG to run it, they decided to book this performing arts series. And I still remember this meeting because they booked, 3 well-known artists. I mean, like, Itzhak Perlman was on that series, some really famous people in their own genres. And we could not give away a ticket. We couldn't sell a ticket. And when I went back to the board to talk about it, I said, why did these artists get chosen? Because that happened before I had actually started. Like, they'd already sort of made these deals in a pre-opening phase. And they're like, well, that's what we thought everybody wanted to go to. And I'm like, what did you want to go to? And they're like, oh, none of us went to that, but that's what we thought everyone would want to go to. And it was really funny because I think sometimes in the arts, we make these assumptions about people and their taste without data or without really being honest about who we are as a community. So to me, you have to meet people where they are, and then you can try and start to open new doors. And we should all do that. Like, we should all keep offering, things for every taste and for every person, wherever they are, sort of on that journey of enjoying everything from, little punk rock things to, what people consider fine art. But sometimes in the arts worlds, we tend to try and preach to people what they should like. And Midland was a really good, it was a really good place for me to understand, like, just meet people where they are and be sincere about it.
Yeah, now that I don't think I've ever sat you down and like tell me every single step along your journey, and I can see, the various things that are, that have gone into building who you are today as a leader, and understanding technology, being around San Francisco, and stopping down Southern California and heading out to Midland and experiencing that. So what was the move to, you said Indiana or Indianapolis?
Yeah, Indianapolis.
Indianapolis. Okay, cool. Yeah. So what was?
I'm gonna close this shade real fast because I'm really red.
Oh, yeah.
From the light
No
coming
problem. Go ahead. Okay, so the lights just got adjusted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Indianapolis, and then to Dayton. So yeah, what's the story there?
Yeah, I mean, we knew that Midland probably wasn't long term, and I have a good friend, a couple good friends at Indiana University who called me and said, "Hey, there's this job opening in Indianapolis at Butler University, and they have the main city facilities, major performing arts facilities, and all the university things as well. So you get to do major Broadway presenting and major concerts and comedy, but also a lot of the work I really enjoy in the arts, in dance and in theater and in music." And they're like, it's sort of the best of both worlds, and they're looking to make a change and rebrand and all these things, and sort of got me interested. And so we made a move to Indianapolis, and my wife actually was on faculty at Butler in ballet. They have a great ballet program. And we created the Butler Arts Center out of a bunch of different venues that all had different managers and different ticketing systems and different marketing people. And it was really a great experience. And I actually thought I'd be at Butler for a long time. We really, I think, cranked up that program and signed a long-term deal with Broadway Across America. I mean, it was really fun project. It was really fun to work in a university setting the way I did. I worked for the president of the university, so he brought me in on a lot of stuff, and I really liked it. I actually was not thinking about a move, and this job in Dayton came open, and the recruiters called me about it a couple times, and I said, I'm enjoying Butler, and we like being in Indianapolis. We've been there almost 3 years, and I was like, and we've moved a bit, and I'm just ready to breathe a bit and not have a new project all the time. And they said, hey, just come over to Dayton. It's only 2 hours away. Have you ever seen the venues here? And I said, no, I'd love to see the venues. And I still remember coming to Dayton and seeing our main performing arts center is called the Schuster Center. And it's now about 20 years old. So 5 years ago, it was about 15 years old. And just seeing what a magnificent building it was. And then looking at the programming happening, it didn't really connect with me that it wasn't doing more shows and better shows and having more people come each year. And then we have a beautiful historic theater, the Victoria Theater, that's 160 years old and fully restored. And it's just a fantastic, smaller building. And then you add to that like small repertory spaces and rehearsal space. And, we have office space and an 1,100 spot parking garage, like all within 2 blocks in downtown Dayton. And I was like, how is more not happening here? And so as I talked to the board, I got really excited. In fact, I remember I was like driving home from Dayton. I called my wife and started talking, and she was basically like, you're going to tell me you want to move to Dayton, aren't you? And they actually offered me the job that day as CEO. So it happened really fast, to be honest. And I just saw it as a huge opportunity to change who we were. So yeah.
Incredible. Can you, to the extent that you can share it, can you talk to me about the economics of an operation like that in terms of how it's structured, how much you rely on donors, ticket sales, like what makes that operation sustain and funded into the future? And you could speak, specifically to Dayton or just generally if you, whatever you're comfortable with. Yeah.
Oh, no. Well, I mean, the good thing about a nonprofit organization is like, it's all public knowledge. So there's no secrets. I guess that's good and bad, right? So I'll talk about where we are currently, because we were a lot different. When I came to the organization in spring of 18, we were the Victoria Theater Association. So first of all, that was the name for everything we did. And the name was really problematic because Victoria Theater is our historic theater. It didn't really represent well all the other things that we own and operate, the ticketing operation we run, the fact that, we're drawing, 500,000 people a year or more to all these different activities. And as we got into it, it was really confusing brand for the entire city, Victoria Theater Association. I still remember I spoke at a Rotary, like my third or fourth week, and a couple people came up to me and they were like, "Hey, good luck against the Schuster Center." And I was just like, "Wait, we own the Schuster Center." They were so confused about who owned and operated these assets. And so it became really clear we needed a huge technology upgrade. We needed to tell our story better. We needed a brand identity that made sense. And so we worked through that first 18 months and did a big research project and brought on a branding partner, a company called Real Art, who was an amazing partner, did tons and tons of, in-person interviews, a lot of electronic data gathering. And we came up together with the brand of Dayton Live. We do live events of all sorts. We wanted to really represent the region and Dayton in particular. And have been really lucky that we had terrible timing. We made the brand announcement change on March 10th, 2020. We got shut down on March 11th. But, all in all, it's been a huge asset for us. And we invested really strongly in ticketing technology. So in terms of where we are now as a company, we're about 90% earned income and 10% contributed. And I think that's a lot different than you'd find in most performing arts centers. We're not government owned. We're totally private nonprofit.
Yeah, 90% sounds high. What would you say the average is? It's like I've heard like as low as 30%.
Yeah, so I would say the average is probably like 78-22 or 80-20, something like that. We're very, very high earned income because we have
That's
a lot
awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's because we have assets, which is good. It's also because we don't have as big an economic base as some other people in terms of the giving ability of the community.
So
we
you
don't
just have to, out of necessity, you have to produce more stuff.
and we support a ton of resident companies and local nonprofits. So at some point, we're all looking at the same pool of money. One of the reasons that ours is so high is we don't have much money in terms of government support at all. Compared to even other people in Ohio, like Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Dayton hasn't had that commitment. Everybody sort of took it for granted that the business community would make it up and private donors, things like that. That's something changing that we're trust me, I want that number to be higher. I wish we were more like 85-15. If we could get to 80-20, that would be good. But when you're talking about a 20 or 25 or $30 million budget each year, those percentages represent a lot of dollars too.
Interesting. I guess initially when you said 90-10, I was initially just thinking like, oh, that's awesome because you are just covering most of your budget with your programming. And when you say you want that 85 to grow, am I hearing it right that you don't want the revenue from what you're producing to decrease? You want donors to increase and therefore, the percentages to shift. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, and obviously just in terms of responsibility and efficiency, we have to keep growing our earned too. And we've grown our earned a lot. But with that growth, we can't decrease, like the problem is when you increase earned, let's say this year I'll earn 15 million.
Yeah.
But my contributed stays the same. Well, the percentage keeps decreasing in that scenario. And that's the trend line that I think we're all working to find more contributed income to go along with the increase.
So, yeah, talk to me about the economics of donors. And obviously like Dayton, Ohio is going to be different than New York City. I mean, vastly different, or Santa Barbara or, whatever, or Des Moines, Iowa. But is it kind of like the 80-20 rule where you have, 20%, from like wealthy individuals that are making huge contributions, or is it more kind of like evenly staggered, or is it like a Bernie Sanders thing, like $18 average, or yeah?
No, in our case, it's probably more like, once again, a 90-10. Like I'd say 90% of our giving comes from 10%. We have, I'd have to go back and really look, but I mean, we have thousands of donors, but a lot of them are, $20. They're adding a $25 gift to a ticket purchase. And those are amazing. But, when your contributed revenue goal for the year is $3 million, It's the $10,000 and $15,000 gifts and the $50,000 gifts that really move the needle most. And so we always have two goals, which is, obviously the amount of overall giving, but we want to make sure we connect to the people that, a significant gift for them is $25, or the younger donors who like what we're doing and, add $10 onto a ticket purchase, or give, $50 on day of giving. And so I think you have to look at it holistically of, we need to raise this amount of money. Where's it going to come from? What are we going to do with it? And are we going to be, honest and transparent in terms of what we do? For us as an organization, Dayton Live encompasses all these venues, but it also encompasses a tremendous amount of education programs. We bring in tens of thousands of school kids a year who pay next to nothing to come see theater performances. We run a full-time creative academy that's operating, basically year round, with classes and learning opportunities, and a lot of high school programs. We run a national affiliated high school musical awards program that brings in like 30 schools a year and thousands of kids. So when you have a lot of programs to back it up and you do really good work, it's easy to tell the story. And then you're just trying to find the right platform for people to participate with you. But it comes in all shapes and sizes, and they're all important. Like, I mean that. For it, a smaller donor might not be as important in terms of dollars, but the fact that they trust you enough to give is really important.
As the CEO, are you, is there like individual contact with the top 10%, the top 1%, and the top 0.1% donors? And is that you, or is that someone else on your team that's like managing those relationships with the folks that are, writing the big contributions?
Oh, no. Yes, I have a team. I have 3 full-time people in development, which is still smaller than the team was when I got there. I actually shrunk the team, and for a year during the pandemic, I ran it myself because I was like, hey, I don't have shows. I'm going to be calling people and checking in and letting them know we need their support. And so, no, I would say probably 15 to 20% of my time is devoted to fundraising, because when it comes down to it, the fundraising is what lets us do the things that make me want to do this. Like it helps subsidize the education programs. It lets us, keep our resident companies doing their work at, a rate that's much, much, much less than what they'd pay, if they were paying the full bill. And then it lets us support smaller companies who are just starting out and trying to do work. We run a program called Community Spotlight, where we actually basically pick up the bill for new arts organizations. Some of them are youth organizations. We have dance and theater in that program, but they get to use one of our smaller spaces for 199 seat theater. So, that's the reason you go do the work and really tell that story to people, is so you can keep doing those programs, and they do make all the difference.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, so just kind of connecting the dots, I met you at IEBA, and being in Dayton, it's all starting to kind of make sense to me. Being in Dayton, and having to come up with so much of your budget yourself means that ultimately you're producing more shows. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong in some of these, like, I don't know, basic connecting the dots that I'm doing here. And then, I think that's also just a bit of a gift and a curse, or sorry, a blessing in disguise, because you and I have talked about it. You think that it's whether you have a strong donor base or not, you kind of control your own future if you are booking your own shows and, doing your own events, and, not relying on other promoters or folks to bring you shows. And obviously, like, that's how we met as the CEO of Prism. Like, Prism's a tool that helps with that. So, I mean, if you could start with just like your philosophy on how much of programming a performing arts center should own, and how it just empowers you as an org to not be reliant on only larger promoters bringing you tours, that would be greatly appreciated. And then we can touch base a little bit about Prism towards the end of that.
Yeah. That's a lot to unpack, but I'll try and be succinct. I mean, I think there's different levels. I think if you look at it just from an income standpoint, if you have the right team to put on shows, however we can get them, I'll take them. If it's a direct present, I'm happy to do that. If it's a co-promote with, a national promoter like Live Nation, AEG, Save Live, Outback, NS2, you name it, I'm happy to do it. I think the biggest thing now is just not having a one size fits all in terms of programming. The performing arts centers, probably the few at this point who are sitting back saying, hey, call us and you can rent our building, and we have no skin in the game. They're not going to succeed. I mean, it's just not happening. People want partners. They want local market partners. They want people who can, have advanced marketing skills to help them sell shows, that understand who their market is, why they should or shouldn't do shows. And so when you put all that together, I think the ones that are doing it best are the ones that are greatly involved and somehow are partners in everything they do. Because then, there's a real motivation to make sure all your shows succeed. And at the same time, when you own and operate the buildings, there's a real motivation to make sure your audiences are having great experiences. And so I think when you put it all together, the days of sort of sitting back and just waiting for somebody to call are over. And if you are lucky enough to be in a market where you don't have to do anything and everybody just calls you, good for you. And that's awesome. And that might work. But I'd say in the majority of the country, that's not the case anymore.
Yeah. And then, I think you were the first performing arts center that I worked with. And honestly, at first, when I first met you and heard what you did, we hadn't worked with any performing arts centers. So I was kind of counting my blessings when you said, hey, yeah, this could be really helpful to me. So anyway, like why did you go with Prism early on, and what has that been like for you? Yeah.
Well, in all honesty, you sort of heard my history. So at the point I met you, I'd been booking shows for, 20 years, in every format and every sort of deal structure you can imagine. I mean, I think just in my years at Wagner Noel, I did like 300 deals on my own as our single talent buyer. And what I knew was in Dayton, I couldn't do that. I couldn't achieve it. And so my team was younger. They weren't as experienced. And I was just putting it all together. I think I just started in Dayton like 5 years ago when we met, Matt, or maybe I was still in Indianapolis. I can't remember. Either way,
you had just started in Dayton. Yeah.
Okay.
And yep.
But either way, what was interesting, I was like, hey, I need a tool where we make it easier, where I can use it as a teaching tool so people really understand what they're doing, but also have some built-in safeguards. Because I had honestly been burnt like a couple years before that with one of my people making a huge mistake on a show that ended up costing me a lot of money and a lot of headaches and aggravation. And as I went back through, I was like, if we did like a forensic audit, how much money have we killed ourselves on over the years by not having a structure to work within on approvals, on offers, on settlements, and everything else in between? And also, how much time and money do we spend trying to manage these processes so manually? So when we first met, I had always been looking for those tools. And I've always been an early adopter of things too, whether it was like venue management programs, ticketing systems. The biggest thing we did in Dayton was invest huge money in all of our web and digital assets, and everything from marketing to ticket management and inventory management. And so to me, the way people consume content, but also consume like purchasing processes, all of it has changed so dramatically. And to put it in perspective, I started at a time in this business where one of my first jobs, I said I got a job with a promoter. That job, my first job, was to drive around to record stores and collect the money and give them more hard tickets that went in a big box on the wall so we could sell tickets. Like that was, when you did a show, you printed all the tickets on little tickets and you took them to all the outlets that sold them. I mean, we were still doing that because you have to think, this was like 96, 97. AOL came out in like 95, I think. There was no such thing as an online purchase. So, phone was like, ooh, fancy, get your telecharge. So having been through like that system of all these different, technology breakthroughs, I think for me, Prism was just a new natural fit. And at the time, to be honest, I don't think you had any idea what Prism would become. You knew what you thought you wanted it to become. And I just thought it was a cool thing to get on board because nobody else was really trying or willing. I think I talked about failure before, and like I'm always willing to fail. I don't think you change things that much if you're not willing to. And I think you always had that spirit of like, let's try stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you were definitely the first performing arts center that I worked with, and now we work with, you know, hundreds of them and thousands of venues around the country. And it's, I mean, it's thanks to, you know, folks like you and the feedback that you've been giving that we've been able to continuously like adopt the system. And, you know, PFM coming on board was a huge help to that. So I'm really grateful for, you know, you seeing that early on and, you know, helping us adopt in general. Yeah.
You know, it's really funny. I mean, true story. So I'm here in New York, as I said, and we'd probably leave meetings yesterday. And I told you earlier, as soon as we finish this, I'm actually running to a show and another show tonight. But what's cool is I had like two different people ask me about Prism last night. And it's not like I go around saying, hey, Prism, Prism, Prism. Like I always am willing to talk to people about what I'm doing that's working, what's helping my team, how we're using tools. And those are tools, everything from, you know, social marketing and the way we, you know, the way that we sell tickets, the way we model subscription accounts, the way we handle customer service team. I take a lot of what I learned in the sports business for how we handle season tickets, you know, like very differently than a typical Broadway experience. But when you put it all together, I think Prism's just, you know, been a really cool tool. We just signed on for co-promote, which I'm really stoked about, because that's been another area where I'm like, okay, how often are we really keeping up to date? And we do, I think last year we did like 230 settlements outside of our own shows, you know, which were like another couple hundred. So it's just,
and just to be clear, we just launched the co-pro feature, which is what Ty is referencing here. And in the spirits of your early adopters, you were one of the first ones to sign up for co-pro. So yeah, thank you again for that. But sorry, continue.
Yeah. Well, and my team's stoked, to be honest. They were like, I mean, we used to like, and we're just starting to use it right now. Like this is all like very current as you're saying this, but like, you know, we're doing it in an accounting system right now, which does not do a good job of helping us settle these things out. So the fact that, you know, we're going to use it for rentals. I mean, we're expanding it more and more and more, but what's cool is, hey, we're also putting like, here's your estimate and we're going to show you actuals versus estimate and all these things side by side. And it's super transparent. And I find the whole thing makes the process easier. And it's on both sides. I actually got an email this morning from a show we just did over the weekend. And somebody's like, hey, they were going back through our offer. And they're like, hey, because it was so clear, you forgot to include this buyout for these things. Can you send it? And I was like, crap, you know, it cost us a few grand, but it's also cool because it was like a side-by-side comparison. And so if I'm an agent, I love that. You know what I mean? Like I can look at it so clearly. And I know we put that up because I can look at it instantly in Prism. And I was actually looking at it on my phone. And I'm like, yeah, that was the deal. And let's put it in. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's just so many positives from it. And I think the whole point of technology is it has to continue to evolve. And I feel like your team is willing to continue to evolve. You know, it's not like it's never, I can't imagine you get to a point where you're like, it's done. The product's done. Like we're done. Like, can you imagine that?
No, it's what drives me the most is like continuing to pump out technology. I just have a lot of fun with that. And I get this question a lot, like, oh, what do you want to like do with your career? And I'm like, you know, honestly, I just have a lot of fun doing this. So hopefully I can, you know, do it as long as possible. And when, you know, software systems are done, I think that's, you know, trouble. It's like, okay, what do you mean it's done?
Well, one of my favorite things was early on, I was talking about Broadway and I was, you know, telling you, and I'm like, and I think it could do this eventually and this and that. And, you know, that was when I think most of your clients were smaller promoters that did single rooms, a lot of GA stuff. And it was, you know, very, very, very early days. And now I look where we are and you're talking about other people and we're talking about Broadway platforms and co-promote and all these things that are coming together. And so for me, I think it'll just continue to be a valuable tool long-term as, you know, your team keeps adding functionality. So it's been pretty cool.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And like, you know, I think to your point about, is Prism ever going to be done? And is the industry ever going to stand still? And, hypothetically, if the industry ever did stand still, then it could possibly be done. But the industry is always shifting and moving. And I think this could be an interesting segue to a question that I would like to wrap up with is, where do you see the performing arts space moving, the industry moving as a whole? That's a big question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Like obviously we came out of the pandemic and there was, all the shows went down and then all the shows kind of came out at once. And now I think the industry is finding an equilibrium. And, what do you see in the next year? What are you excited about in the next 5 years? What do you see in the future in terms of the performing arts industry and what people should pay attention to?
Yeah, it's such a huge question. And, I have a lot of colleagues who've been doing this a lot longer than I have. A lot of the performing arts center CEOs, they're 70 years old. I mean, that's pretty typical. And so I like to listen a lot. And one thing we're all experiencing universally is that the audiences for commercial programming, popular programming have really come back, and we're seeing strong growth. Live Nation had their biggest year ever. 22 has been this massive year, except for like the more traditional performing arts, symphonies, ballets, operas. And so I think a process that was already happening where some of those audiences were aging out and they weren't being replaced has just probably been, and so that's scary. That's scary to all of us. And so I think everyone is looking at their programming and how does it connect to audiences. And I think a lot of our legacy arts organizations, from the small ones or the medium size like Dayton to the biggest arts organizations in the world, are going to have to really look at, are we relevant to audiences anymore? And if we're not, how do we become relevant? And how do we reach young people so that they'll understand what we do and why it's important to them?
I'm so glad you brought that up, and it actually just made me flash back. I went to an orchestra in Santa Barbara at the Granada Theater, and it was my favorite concert that I've been to in a long time. There was 3 different sets. They performed a piece from a local conductor that was that was narrated live by like a local Chumash woman. Native American, like sharing Native American wisdom, and a whole orchestra that was playing. And then Alessio Bax sat in on a set.
Wow.
And then they ended with a Mozart piece, and I just got my soul blown out of my body for 3 hours, and I could have gone 10 more hours. And it was half sold. And the average person in the crowd was, I think, over 75, 80. I really appreciated that. I think that's amazing. But I left thinking like, well, what's going on here? Because I'm 33. I just picked up the cello. I have a growing interest in classical music. But it didn't have that, that pull that a rock concert might have, but the music that was extraordinary. I mean, I think that was the best concert I've been to in the last 10 years. And I couldn't help but think that, some of it is marketing. Some of it is just people's taste, but I think if more people our age knew about it, I think it could have a reemergence. Like the industry is always oscillating. Like, 10 years ago, everyone's like, oh, everything's going electric, and goodbye to like instruments being performed. And like now, like guitar players are like back and better than ever. And everyone's like, oh, electronic DJs, no big deal. And like, obviously a classic music performance is far in the other direction. But I think classic music is incredible, and it's not just classic music, but what have you had the same thoughts as me, and what do you think it will take to breathe more life into those more traditional performances? And I also want to say, for the record, I really love being in a space where someone who is 90 or 80 was like, I want to be in the same room as them, but I'm just wondering why it wasn't more full, and how can there could be a little bit of a balancing energy there, or do you believe in classic music and being able to pull people in, or is it just adopting the content that you're putting on there? And, that's just going to have the audience it's going to have. I was just rambling there for a second, but I think you can pick up my word storm there and run with it.
No, I'm 100% with you. So I think there's 2 things that are driving it. We stopped giving kids arts education like 20 years ago. So even like going to school in the 80s, I was constantly exposed to like band and instruments and all these things. And I mean, like I'll get sort of deep on this, and we could do like a whole nother. I could bring in my whole education team who are experts in this, but I'm going to go back to like some of the legislation in the early 2000s, like No Child Left Behind, and we created all these national standards for testing that kids have to like. Basically, our kids are taught to test now. I see it with my kids all the time. Like we teach to the test, and there was no arts components to any of it. And so all of a sudden, the school started pulling all these things out that had been done for so long to create lovers of arts, and especially things like instruments and, not just classical music, but, classical instrumentation more than music. And so we created generations of kids that have no exposure to it. And so they're not just going to magically be like, I want to go check out a symphony, because they don't even have a vocabulary to talk about it. And
Yeah, it was me picking up the cello that like got me interested in it,
Yeah.
So yeah, this is fascinating. Keep going. Yeah.
But in that vein, I think it's also up to the people that work in the arts to make sure, the idea of STEM education becomes STEAM education, and we put arts back into it, because what we're hearing from all the top business leaders is what they want most are people that can communicate. And so, a kid that grows up with theater or dance or music, they learn to work in teams, they learn to communicate, they learn to express their own feelings. I can give you a rundown of so much data about why arts education is important and why it leads to positive outcomes. It prevents self-harm. It leads to, people that are educated and empathetic and team-oriented and really able to deal with their own emotions, which is what we're worried about in all our kids. I have a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old, and my 13-year-old loves choir and loves to sing, and it's the favorite part of his day. He's also really good at math. So, it can all work together. But I really think that's what we're missing right now. And so I don't think we're going to fix that overnight. And so the companies will have to keep adapting to what they do and how much they program and for who. But there's not a simple solution to this. There's some really great thought leaders in the space. Aubrey Bergauer, David Taylor, a couple that I, have followed. And I think all of us are saying the right things. We have a huge marketing problem that, people who weren't educated in those segments of the arts are maybe uncomfortable coming because they feel like they don't know enough to come, even if they want to. So we really just have to be accepting and create opportunities to connect to people. Because once you get them there, people are like, this is amazing. Like, I really feel great being here. Or they realize that they love these different forms of music. But I think our job in running venues is just create opportunities, create connections, create places people can experience new things that they want to experience again.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Super fascinating. And like, I think, I'm going to mispronounce this person's name because frankly, I haven't read it, but there's a cello player that's like Billie Eilish's age, his name, and he's in England. He's like Sheku something, Sheku. And I saw him just pop up on NPR, and he just plays the cello, and he's like the same. And I think it's very fascinating. He's the same age as Billie Eilish, because like obviously Billie Eilish is incredible, but then here's this person playing the cello, and seeing that pop up in NPR. I think the younger generation is, has interest in all types of different types of music, and it is a complex problem, but I think it will create a more beautiful world into the future. If there's more kind of like classic music infused into our upbringing, and just music in general. And like, I was in a family, thankfully, where I grew up playing the piano, and arts was emphasized. And yeah, I'm a big believer in that as well. So I'm curious to stay in the loop with like where that goes. And once again, I think it's just an incredible thing for society if that, does continue to increase. But really, really fascinating. Thanks a lot for sharing that perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's critical to us being able to stay relevant. So, honestly, also along with that, be willing to adapt, because music and what is considered art changes. And so I talked earlier about, meet people where they are. So meet them where they are, but then create new opportunities for them to engage.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. There's like so much more that we can go, but I know you're about to go to an awesome performance. So I'll let you go, but that's definitely a great topic to end on. And yeah, once again, thank you, Ty, for all the support and help along the way. Thank you for this awesome conversation. I super appreciate you.
Oh, I'm so glad, and thanks for the opportunity. It's cool to just, I don't know how many people will see this, but it's been really fun to sort of take a journey down memory lane of like how I ended up where I am. So
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I'm gonna stop the recording. Here we go.